All right, my name is Reverend T. I am the unrefined priest, and today I want to talk about an interesting topic of clergy endorsing political candidates due to a couple lawsuits in Texas. The IRS has declared that clergy and churches are now allowed to endorse political candidates. And that is going to have some ramifications. I'm going to show you a video from Michael's Schmirkanish, who's going to be talking about this, breaking it down. But I think that this is going to be a harsh reality check for churches as they begin to move into this. I'll break that down on the other side of this video, but the Johnson rule, which has been in effect since I believe 1954, somewhere around there, is no longer, and now churches have permission to make political endorsements of candidates, and that's a pretty significant shift. So let me play what Schmirkanish has to say about this, and then I will jump in and give you my thoughts on it.
Back to today, the Wednesday poll question: should religious leaders be permitted to endorse political candidates in churches and other religious centers without losing their tax-exempt status? You've heard of the Johnson rule. It's more accurately referred to as the Johnson Amendment because it pertains to something that Lyndon Johnson was responsible for when Lyndon Johnson was in the United States Senate in the mid-1950s. So it was 1954. His amendment restricted 501c3, meaning tax-exempt organizations. By the way, not just churches, not just houses of worships. I'll come back to that in a moment. From engaging in partisan political activity. So what it has prohibited, if you want to retain your tax-exempt status, you can't endorse or oppose a candidate for elected office, you can't contribute to a political campaign, and you can't use your resources, the pulpit, the funds, the publications, for partisan electioneering. What you can do is discuss political and social issues. You can hold nonpartisan voter education forums. You can speak on public policy. You can advocate for legislation with limits on lobbying. And look, there's always been a gray area, particularly in the minority community. Black churches historically have invited candidates in, and probably they invite everybody in, and only some candidates, Democratic candidates, accept their invitations. I've always thought that walked right up to the line. But from reading in on what came yesterday, which is a change in all of this, I realized there really hasn't been enforcement of the Johnson Amendment. So what transpired now? The IRS has moved to allow political engagement from churches. This is perceived as a win for evangelical groups. They said, the IRS, that religious leaders could endorse political candidates in churches and other religious centers without losing their tax-exempt status. The agency said that in a court filing intended to settle a lawsuit filed by two Texas churches and an association of Christian broadcasters. It's kind of an odd way, for the IRS to make this new policy known, to do it in a statement as part of this court filing. I went and read the court filing, and that which has been posted online was not yet signed. It was a draft, but that's what all this hullabaloo is about. The IRS has agreed to this narrow carve-out, one that experts in nonprofit law say might sharply increase politicking in churches, even though it mainly seemed to formalize what already seemed to be the agency's unspoken policy, because as I told you, they've really not been enforcing the Johnson.
All right, there's a couple things that I want to point out here. First of all, he's going to bring up the money part of this. And this is where this is going to get really, really messy. Because can political candidates use churches as a way of funneling money through kind of like a tax exempt organization? That gets a little bit messy. But the other thing that he brings up that I think is really good before we go on is this is a rule that has not really been enforced. And most people are aware that this has not been enforced. You know that churches have been endorsing political candidates for years. I mean, this has taken place quite a bit, where churches bring people in, and there may not be this formal announced endorsement, but you know where they're at. And he brought up, you see it a lot in African American churches, and you do. Just recently, Kamala Harris went to several churches. She preached at least one of them, and there was, I mean, there's nobody that's watching that's thinking this church isn't endorsing her. But you also see it on the far right churches, bringing in different people and endorsements per se taking place as well. So this is something that has been taking place, and the IRS has not been enforcing it. So the shift that is taking place here is now making something that was prohibited but not enforced now legal. And so I don't know that the shift is a massive issue on that end, because it has already been taking place pretty much across the board. I mean, this is something that churches engage in quite a bit. So let me play a little bit more, because he does have some more interesting ideas here.
An amendment. The agency said that if a house of worship endorsed a candidate to its congregants, the IRS would view that. Listen to this. This is the most important part. The IRS would view that not as campaigning, but as a private matter, like a family discussion concerning candidates. Well, okay, I guess I understand that. You know, I'm picturing a priest. I'm picturing a rabbi. I'm picturing an imam in a mosque, in a particular synagogue, in a particular church, you know, making some type of an endorsement statement from the pulpit, from the bema, whatever the case may be. But how do you say, well, we're going to allow that, but if it comes from the mothership, you know, if it comes from the Vatican, well, that's not, you know, that's not a house of worship endorsing just to its congregants. Really? Well, then what's the difference? What about a yard sign in front of the church? What about
a couple of really good points here. I love the fact that they're describing it as a family discussion. I love that, because that's really what the church is. But on the other hand, that's not what would be taking place. It's not a family discussion. This is coming down from the top down to the people. This is a way in which the clergy are trying to exercise some sort of authority over their congregation and to put their name out there in the lights. That's really what it is. It's not a family discussion. Although that's a beautiful image and probably what it should be, that's not what it is. And then the other thing that he brings up is, yeah, this can take place in those smaller realms in churches, but can it take place from the Vatican? Can it take place from entire dioceses? Can it take place from an entire denomination? Like the Presbyterians come out and they're endorsing whatever candidate. Is this something that is limited to individual churches, or can this be broadened out to all Roman Catholics now support this candidate, or all Episcopalians now support this candidate? And that's where you run into messiness. And there will certainly be some messiness to this. He's bringing out, you know, like church yard signs. He's also going to bring up the idea of online attendance, because now churches are using things like YouTube and things like that to get their message out to a larger group of people, which means it's beyond a family conversation at that point, isn't it? You're putting it out there to the masses when you put it on YouTube, or at least you have the opportunity for masses to see it. So I got one more little snippet, and then I'll share my final thoughts on this.
About the fact that houses of worship today largely have their services online. If it's online, by definition, is it still just to those congregants?
Give yourself 28 days and become the most dangerous person in the room. It's 2025. AI can build a pro-level.
And what about the opportunity for manipulation? I mean, I see, political operatives now perhaps funneling money to their preferred candidates while receiving a tax break that a quote unquote house of worship affords. I think that it's really fraught. I think it's really, really fraught. And I'm going to make a mingle.
All right. That's the main point that I want to bring up here. This is messy. And this could get very messy very quick when you start bringing in the finances and all of that sort of thing. So I do think that there's a lot of messiness, a lot of things that we need to figure out on this before we just jump right into this. But here's where I end on this. I don't really think this is a big deal. And then on the other hand, I really think this is a big deal. So let me share with you why I don't think this is a big deal. And the main reason that I don't think this is a big deal is because in the 50s, when this amendment was brought forward, it probably was a really big deal because clergy had a lot of influence and you really could move the needle as a priest or a pastor in a church. Those days are gone. And so I think this is going to be a really big wake-up call for clergy to realize that you do not have the voice that you once thought you had. And part of this is the birth of the internet and how much access people have to information, that they're not dependent upon the clergy the way the clergy would like them to be. I mean, this even funnels down into theological conversations. People just jump online, they do a quick Google search, and now they think they're an expert, even though they may not know a damn thing about it, about the topic they're talking about. Because they did the Google search, they feel as though they have information. And that comes into play in the political arena as well. People feel as though they have information. They're not dependent upon their clergy to tell them who they should vote for or not. The second reason that I don't think clergy have the influence that they think they do or that they used to have is we've made a lot of mistakes. We've messed up big time in the church, and there are consequences to that. Look, if clergy would stop screwing around with little kids, maybe you would have a voice in people's lives. But for right now, you don't have the voice that you once had because we've seen the disaster that clergy are. If clergy would stop stealing money from churches, or doing shady things to get money from people in churches, maybe you would have the influence that you used to have. But now all that's out there, it's exposed. And people don't have the trust or the faith in clergy that they used to have. If clergy would stop screwing around with other people's wives in church, maybe you would have the influence that you have. But all of these things combined have really set the clergy back. You do not have the influence that you think you have. And so you can stand up there and endorse whatever candidate you want to. The people aren't listening. And they're not listening because you lost the voice. Because you no longer have that perch of spirituality that you once had. You traded that in. And you traded it in for money and sex. And so I don't believe that even if you give clergy the option to make endorsements, that it's going to make a whole lot of effect in the church. I think people are still going to vote for whoever they want to vote for. And I think this is going to be a wake-up call for clergy. On the other hand, this does concern me, because as much as I don't think that clergy have a voice the way that they think they do, I'm surely convinced that they still think that they have that voice. And they're still going to act as though they have that voice, and they're going to make endorsements, political endorsements, thinking that they can move the needle for the people in their congregation. And the reason that that concerns me is not because clergy can't be involved in politics. That we should be involved in political ideas. We really should. Because that's what people are concerned about. How can you bring Jesus into those moments or those ideas or those decisions that are taking place that are on people's minds? I think that we should be doing that. But I don't think that we should be endorsing candidates, because every time you are spending time endorsing a candidate, you have made a decision to not talk about Jesus. You have made a decision to not emphasize the work and life of Jesus Christ. Instead, you're going to be talking about Donald Trump or Kamala Harris or Barack Obama or George Bush or whoever it is. You're going to be focused on that individual rather than the person and work of Jesus Christ. And because I believe clergy still think they have a voice, they're going to do it. And so people are going to show up on Sundays, and instead of hearing about the grace and love of Jesus Christ, what they're going to get is how Donald Trump or Kamala Harris or whoever the next great candidate is can change their life. And I think people come to church because they want to hear how Jesus can change their life. So I'm concerned about it because I think clergy are going to take this opportunity, but I'm also not concerned about it because I don't think clergy have the voice that they once had or think that they have. But this is pretty big news, and we'll see how it pans out. I don't know that you're going to really see this pan out until the next presidential election in about 3 years. So it should be a fun road for us to travel down. My name is Reverend T. I am the Unrefined Priest. If you like what I'm doing, hit that like button as well as the subscribe button. Trying to build a community here, and we'll catch you on the next one.